Public will have an opportunity to interact with various African embassies, artists and cultural groups. The Human Sciences Research Council is hosting this event to share information among citizens in the continent and to promote the spirit of unity and tolerance. To tell us a little bit more, we're joined in our studio in Pretoria by Dr Emmanuel Owusu-Sekyere. He is the Chief Research Specialist at the Africa Institute of South Africa. That, of course, is a unit of the HSRC. Good to have you. Thank you very, very much for being our guest here on the program.
Good morning, Leanne, and hello to your viewers as well.
All right, so how often do ordinary people have an opportunity to mingle with embassies?
Well, because of our line of work as an African Institute, we get to do that quite often. We have an ambassadorial forum. We used to have an ambassadorial forum where different countries would come and speak about their relationship with Africa, South Africa, and what they're doing on the continent. So it's something we get to do or see quite often. But on the Africa Day, we have a number of them coming at the same time to talk about, to exhibit what they have. You know, Africa is most of the time seen as one country instead of a continent of 55 states. Yeah. You know, and when there's a disease outbreak in one country, there's a travel warning issued against the whole continent. Yeah, they know exactly where to go for what you're looking for. So it's a day when we celebrate our diversity, in diversity strength, and also celebrate what makes us similar, what we have in common, that should bind us together more than drive us apart in conflict. Mm-hmm. It's also a celebration and a commemoration of the formation of the Organization for African Unity in 1963 and the ideals that it stood for. So it's something we celebrate together as a continent.
Yeah, it is quite interesting what you say. I know a lot of people just do tend to put these 55 states into one, and people are not educated enough about Africa, and the narrative of Africa always seems to be that same narrative of a poverty-stricken, war-ridden continent that truly has nothing to offer, and yet that is not the story. Why is our story not being shared adequately with the world?
Thank you very much. See, Africa is not a poor continent, it's a very rich continent. For 500 years, that is 5 centuries, the mineral resources of Africa has been plundered by the rest of the world. And we still do have mineral resources that they still keep coming back for. Indeed. So when you plunder something for 500 years and it doesn't get finished, and you still keep coming back for more, it means that territory is extremely rich. And the problem is that the whole world has a strategy for Africa, but Africa has no strategy for anybody. Yeah. The Chinese have a strategy for Africa. The global north has a strategy for Africa, but Africa does not have a strategy for anybody. So we are just plundered over and over again, without getting anything back, without having a plan to determine and dictate what we want back. The problem is also that our development agenda is not owned by us. It's funded by aid from other countries, and he who pays the piper calls the tune. So we cannot also define our development agenda and be very clear on what we want as a continent. So the exchange is a very imbalanced exchange to the benefit of the rest of the world, to the detriment of the African continent. Yeah. And even locally, we have a strong challenge with good leadership. Yeah. That should make sure that the resources we have and the agreements we go into benefit the people of the continent in terms of job creation, poverty reduction, and addressing inequality. Yeah,
I like what you've just said, and I think that does unfortunately speak to many of the African countries, and we need to change that in the way we operate with the outside world. I want to talk a little bit about tolerance within Africa and of each other. You know, there's so many instances of xenophobic attacks, and we've still got these attacks on foreign business owners in townships, for example. Perhaps not as often as before. I no doubt it is still happening. How would you say that Africans have learned to become more tolerant of each other? How are we embracing each other?
I think we need to realize that although we are quite diverse as a continent, quite heterogeneous territory, in diversity is strength. We also need to realize that we have more similar characteristics that should bind us together than drive us apart in conflict. It's very sad to see such xenophobic attacks happen every now and then. It simply goes to show that we need to improve our understanding of each other's cultures, our exposure to foreign cultures, and how similar they are to us. And South African society needs to do more work in that direction in terms of being more tolerating and accepting of foreign cultures. And that's what a day like Africa Day does. It exposes, you have different countries exhibiting, exposing their cultures, exposing their craft, their music, their cuisine, and their fashion, and what they stand for, who they are, and what defines them. And that exhibition alone tells you, you begin to identify similarities and areas where you look so much like each other. Almost every African country migrated from somewhere to where we are today. No countries, tribes, or peoples have originally been there since creation. All of us migrated from somewhere. So we need to understand that we have strong, if you go back centuries down the line, you realize that we have very strong linkages. And the boundaries on the continent were actually created by the scramble for Africa a couple of centuries back. They are artificial boundaries created by the colonialists. These were not boundaries created by Africans. So if you, in many aspects of the continent, you realize that we are one people. And we need to have that understanding and learn to live together.
Indeed, indeed. Just finally, as we wrap this up, you recently hosted the annual African Unity for Renaissance International Conference, which kind of looks into the issues that we've been speaking about here, the issue of unity amongst Africans. What were some of the outcomes of this event?
We had some very powerful outcomes from the conference. In fact, too many of them, but just to mention about 3 or 4. First of all, we realized, and we were taught by some mining experts, that beneficiation is quite too far out in the forward part of the value chain, mining value chain. It's a forward linkage that does not create enough jobs. We need to look at production linkages in a backward direction, and that's where the jobs are. There are more jobs in backward linkages than in forward linkages. And before you get to beneficiation, there are so many services and lower hanging fruits that African countries could easily do to enrich their people, build capacity and strength over time before you can get into beneficiation. The other issue that came up was that agricultural production has been rain dependent since time immemorial. Now that undermines our food security, and we have to begin to look at irrigation technologies that would wean us a bit from the dependence on the rain. We saw the damage caused by El Nino and La Nina weather phenomena, and how many African countries are still in drought. We need to begin to look at irrigation technologies to mitigate drastic weather changes and how that affects and impacts our food security. The third one was that the African graduate, 50% of all African graduates are unemployed as at end 2016. The problem being that they are said to have a skills mismatch, and therefore the private sector cannot work with them. The private sector must be allowed, or the universities must allow the private sector to play a strong role in curriculum design, so that when the graduate leaves the school, he's able to work immediately or be able to be absorbed by the labor force. Basically, the private sector says they don't know what we need them to know, and the university sector says we've taught them something else. So where is the gap? We need to bridge that gap. If private sector can tell the institutions what to teach to make them be able to work with them, it will bridge the skills gap. Because basically they would have been taught and trained in what they are required to know by the private sector and labor market.
Yeah. All right, we leave it there. Emmanuel, thank you so much for talking to us here on this Africa Day. Dr. Emmanuel Owusu-Sekyere is the Chief Research Specialist at the Africa Institute of South Africa. It's a unit of the HSRC. Let's take a break. See you after this.